comments are on the record, they're on television, and there's so much video of what's happened. If members were egging on people in the crowd itself, that would be aiding and abetting this attack on the democracy and the Constitution.
Finally, sir, I know you all received a security briefing. You've been receiving constant updates on that as well. How dangerous is it to be a member of Congress right now?
Well, I think the worry is not any longer being here in the Congress of the United States or being in your office. I think the danger is, and many members experience this, travel to and from your office in Washington, much more so in public transportation or private transportation, on the airlines, on trains. Obviously, if you're in a private car, you're in pretty good shape. But I think there is a concern of members who were confronted by MAGA hat-wearing individuals who verbally assaulted our members. I don't know that there were any physical confrontations, but there was no doubt that our members were very, very concerned and uncomfortable on planes with people who recognized them, or even if they didn't recognize them, talking boisterously about how proud they were of committing this seditious act in the Congress of the United States, on the Congress of the United States, trying to intimidate the Congress of the United States and prevent them from doing their jobs. So I think the answer, George, is I think here on this campus, I think this campus is pretty tucked down right now. We have thousands of National Guard, armed National Guard, our Capitol Police, FBI, Maryland, and Montgomery County, Fairfax, Arlington, I think, are also cooperating. I don't know that any of them are on the ground now. They were on the night of the 6th and the morning of the 7th. But I think the worry is at home and traveling to home, members are urged to call their local law enforcement so that local law enforcement can be looking out for them. And very frankly, if there are specific threats to members, the Capitol Police will be alerted and will be available to assist.
Congressman, stay safe. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Number of Republican yeses now up to 9, as we're seeing the vote continue there on the House impeachment of President Trump for the second time. As we've said, never happened before in American history. There's the numbers right there. 9 Republicans, 192 Democrats. We still have about 50 members of Congress left to vote right now. I want to bring in Sarah Fagan, Republican strategist. And Sarah, it was striking. I was surprised that more House Republicans, at least those who spoke, we'll see what the final number of votes are, did not take the tack that we saw from Kevin McCarthy. What the president did was wrong, but it may not rise to an impeachable offense to be done in this way at this time.
Yeah, I think that these numbers to me are a little surprising. I recognize there are certainly 9 more than voted for impeachment the first time, but I would have expected this to be higher by Republicans, and I would have expected more Republicans, even if they disagree with impeachment for a variety of reasons, that they would have more forcefully spoken out against the president's actions and his behavior, not only last Wednesday, but in the days after Wednesday. It took him almost a week to really acknowledge that this was completely inappropriate. Having said that, you know, this is politics at play. Rahm, who spoke a bit ago, had suggested censure on last Wednesday evening. That would have gotten many, many more Republicans. Democrats don't want that. They want the politics of the impeachment. Republicans, on the other hand, they don't want primaries. And one thing that I am certain of is if you pop your head up and raise your hand, even if it's the right thing to do, you are asking for a primary. These members of Congress will be firing up the election machine here in about 2 months for the next election, and that is top of mind, unfortunately. We'll see it play out differently in the Senate, where people have 6 years in between cycles. They have a longer time to sort of get past some of these tougher issues.
Okay, Sarah Fagan, thanks very much. As you pointed out, this is a political process. It's basically, it's got legal trappings inside a political institution, so let's bring in our legal team for more on this as well. And Dan Abrams, I try to assess it from that perspective. If you're looking ahead to the trial in the Senate, assess the arguments you were seeing from each side. Which were the strongest points?
Well, first let me focus on what we didn't hear. Not a single Republican member of Congress said this election was stolen from Donald Trump, that that's a travesty. Why is that important? Because that's why the rioters were there. They were there because the president told them the election was stolen. And yet not one member of Congress today said the election was stolen. Matt Gaetz said there were concerns, et cetera. And that's significant on the argument about the double standard. And something we heard again and again about, well, why didn't Democrats condemn their own? That's a fair conversation to have. But not all incendiary language is created equal. And that's clear because when you allege that literally the democracy is broken, that the guy who actually won the election isn't getting to stay there, you are stirring up a lot of trouble. And not a single member of that House today was willing to go that far. And so I think when evaluating the arguments, as we see what's going to come in the Senate, I do think you're going to hear a little less of the invective, a little bit less of the Matt Gaetz type arguments in the Senate, and more of the sort of process argument. More, I think you're going to see arguments about federal law and the law of incitement, saying that it didn't reach that level, rather than the sort of some of the purely political arguments we heard today. But I do think it's so important to focus on that because more than half of Republicans still believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. It's a lie. It's not true, and it's incredibly incendiary, and that's the reason you didn't hear it today.
And that's a good point. Let me bring that to Kate Shaw as well. Kate, I would imagine the Democrats, when they go to the trial, will be talking a lot more about that pattern of lies since Election Day, that phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State, in addition to the inciting of the riot last week. I would expect one more thing you're going to hear from Republicans is, especially if this starts after Joe Biden is inaugurated, basically, what's the point? He's out of office now. It's not proper to have this kind of a trial after the president leaves office.
That's right. I think that the Senate trial arguments will probably largely track what's in the impeachment article, and that is, really a focus on the events of January 6th, but situating those events in the context of the president's conduct and rhetoric over the course of the past 2 months. So it wasn't just January 6th. It's essentially everything that's happened since the election. So I do think you'll hear arguments like that. I do think we heard today a lot of kind of what is the point? It's just politics from the president's supporters. And I think the Democrats actually have, and Republicans who will support impeachment, have a lot of responses to that. One, some kind of decisive repudiation of the conduct is important, even if there's only a week left in the term, might be important even after inauguration. Two, deterrence of future recurrence of this kind of conduct, and then potentially disqualification from future office holding. So all of those things, I think, are answers to the kind of what is the point question, whether that question is raised prior to January 20th or even if we do find ourselves in a situation of having a Senate trial, as it looks like we will after inauguration.
Well, there is a majority now. You see it right there, 228 so far with 11 still to vote for the impeachment resolution. So it has enough votes to pass. You saw 10 Republicans have voted for it as well. So Donald Trump has indeed been impeached for a second time, the only American president to impeach twice. There are the numbers right there, 228 to 194. It's not the final numbers yet, but they have crossed over the threshold of a majority to impeach Donald Trump, which means a Senate trial of some form is coming. I want to bring in a former senator to talk about that now, Heidi Heitkamp, former Democratic senator from North Dakota. Heidi, looking forward to this impeachment that is a trial that is going to be probably coming in the next couple of weeks. Assess the prospects in the Senate.
Well, George, if I can just kind of go back to Liz Cheney and think about what her father did 2 weeks ago. He orchestrated a letter to be put for former secretaries of defense to warn the Pentagon, do not engage, do not do things that are unconstitutional. And then she comes out and makes a very strong statement. I think Congress doesn't know what they don't know. And that's really the danger of people assuming that everything you're going to know about the president's behavior is on the table. I find it interesting that Mitch McConnell is now waiting to have this trial. I think he expects there's going to be more very, very difficult facts coming out for the president. I think he has refused to say that he would not support impeachment. I think that he feels like his caucus would be in a better position to analyze all of this after the facts, more facts are known. And let's put on top of that the warning that we received yesterday from the acting U.S. attorney who said, we are going to be shocked by what we hear. We can't be shocked by the behavior of renegades and insurgents. We will be shocked by the behavior of people within this government, whether it's in Congress or whether it is in the White House and surrounding the president, whether they were complicit in these attacks. And so I expect that we're going to find out more information. And once we do, a number of those congressional people who voted no today are going to be quite embarrassed.
Heidi Heitkamp, thanks very much. We have one of those members of Congress with us right now, Dusty Johnson, Republican of South Dakota. I don't know if you were able to hear Heidi Heitkamp right there, but she made the point that she believes that those who voted no today are going to be embarrassed as more facts come out, even more damning facts come out in the days and weeks ahead. Tell us about your vote, why you voted no.
Well, I would say to Senator Heitkamp that I think that's why a snap impeachment was such a bad idea. If there are new facts that will be coming out in the next day or two or three, I think lots of members of the House on both sides of the aisle would have been interested in understanding that. I mean, this is the first impeachment process in history that didn't have a single hearing. Nobody was able to call witnesses. I mean, with 7 days left in the president's term, I do think we still need to be concerned about things like due process if we want to convince ourselves this is a legal process rather than just a political one.
Do you agree with your leader, Kevin McCarthy? You said that the president bears responsibility for the events of last Wednesday.
Oh, the president deserves plenty of responsibility. I mean, his words and actions, not just last week, but leading up to that, certainly made things worse rather than better. I made that clear last week, and I think it's not, I don't want to create in him a villain. There is a desire in the immediate aftermath of these tragic events to maybe explain them in overly simplistic ways, George. The reality is there are a lot of us who have been trying to tap into this outrage, and we've been making it worse. A lot of politicians have been doing it for personal gain or political gain. This should be a wake-up call for our country. And I would just mention this one more thing. The rhetoric I heard on the House floor today was some of the most toxic partisan rhetoric I have heard. That has been my concern about the impeachment process. I have a hard I do not believe it has moved us in the right direction.
So how do you, what's your argument, though, to the Democrats who argue that if you look at the totality of the president's actions since the election, lying about the results, telling his supporters that it was a stolen election, encouraging them to go to the barricades in the Congress, and calling election officials, trying to get them to find votes that aren't there? How do you explain that? How is that not impeachable?
Well, and first I would mention that, you know, I voted to accept the state certifications last week. I mean, I understand. I didn't agree with the president on those votes last week. I mean, I felt like he was wrong. A lot of the rhetoric you just described was not helpful, and it's not the kind of thing we want to hear in a constitutional republic. I don't know practically what impeachment, though, George. I mean, it just seems like it is a political exercise because we're not going to remove the president with 7 days left to go. The Senate has made that clear. They don't have the time to do that. I mean, it takes you 2 months to try and convict a convenience store robber. You know, high crimes and misdemeanors seems like it should take more than 7 days. So what is impeachment after a president has left office? Conviction on its own does not bar him from running for federal office in the future. If this is just a super formal scolding, it seems like Speaker Pelosi could have done that same thing with a censure, which would have been a lot more likely to gain dozens, if not more than 100 Republican votes.
Would you have voted for censure?
Oh, I think it would have been something that I would have been really open to. I mean, I have said the president's lots of his actions and words did not help, and I think there would have been a lot of people like me who would have viewed that as a very realistic option.
But not a yes?
Well, I mean, you need to see how it's written, right? I mean, the reality is that words matter, facts matter, and I think the censure managers would have had to establish a good case. I don't have any doubt that they could have. My only hesitation, George, is that I've seen my colleagues on the left, too often they have overreached, and they have done so in a way that's made it difficult to bring Republicans on board.
How do you see the next couple of years going in your term of Congress?
Well, none of us, I shouldn't say none of us, I certainly didn't go to Congress to want to engage in the kind of partisan petty squabbling that has seemed to dominate the last 2 years. That's not how I'm wired. I mean, I want to solve problems. I mean, I talk every day with, bipartisan lawmakers where we identify areas that we want to move the needle. And that's been one of my concerns about the impeachment process. The relationships between the Republicans and the Democrats in the House right now, George, this week is as bad as it has been in the 104 weeks that I've been in Congress. It is a sad state of affairs, and it is going to be difficult emotionally for us to recover from what happened last week and what is happening this week.
Congressman Johnson, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Let's check back in on that vote right there. You see the numbers right there, 231. Votes now for the impeachment of Donald John Trump. 10 Republicans have voted yes this time. Again, remember, no Republicans voted for the impeachment of the president. That was just a year ago. Remember that. It was just a year ago this week that the House was preparing to send their articles of impeachment to the Senate for a trial. Just a few days away from that. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is approaching the podium right now. You might notice that she is wearing exactly the same outfit that she wore 1 year ago for the impeachment of President Trump, and that mace, that brooch on her lapel, signifying the Sergeant-at-Arms, the power of the Sergeant-at-Arms, the authority of Congress to rule itself. Let's listen in on the Speaker. She's not quite prepared to talk right now, but you see the numbers. The votes are there right now for the impeachment. She has not said, I asked Congressman Hoyer when the articles are going to be sent to the Senate. She has not made that final decision yet. We wouldn't expect she would make it from the podium, but likely before the close of business today, she will announce, certainly by tomorrow, when she will be intending to send this over. A big question will be when the Senate can accommodate that. Of course, at least for the next several days, the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, has the power to block and determine how they come over. He would have to agree to having the Senate go into an emergency session to have any kind of a trial before the 19th, and he has already ruled that out. It is even possible that they will have the Senate trial starting on as early as January 20th, just 1 hour after Joe Biden is actually inaugurated as President of the United States, which is a reminder, David Muir, we have a huge week ahead after a week unlike any other in American history.
I mean, it's just extraordinary to think that the Senate trial could actually begin concurrently with the inauguration of the next president. As we take a look at the physicality of what we're seeing around Washington, this enormous presence of troops, the National Guard inside the Capitol, just 1 week after this attack. We know from the U.S. Capitol Historical Society that not since the Civil War have we seen the Guard and troops quartered in the Capitol as we have seen, getting rest in the hallways, on the floors as they protect the Capitol, not only for what we're seeing unfold here today, but as you point out, inauguration quickly coming on January 20th. As you point out, the Senate Majority Leader, at least for the next several days, Mitch McConnell, saying he is not interested in bringing back the Senate any earlier than then. So a very real possibility that this happens all on the same day. One thing to point out is there's a big difference in Mitch McConnell from the last Senate trial. Of course, going into the last trial, he said, I'm not an impartial juror here. He promised even in advance to work in total coordination with the White House, the president's legal team, saying there will be no difference between the president's position and our position, obviously meaning his own position. That's not what he's saying this time. Mitch McConnell saying that he welcomes the impeachment process. Pleased was the word first reported by the New York Times and then confirmed by our own Washington team. It's been reported.
Have all members voted?
Right there.
Speaker Pelosi.
Does any member wish to change a vote? Where's she coming from? No, can't go.
Speaker's asked if any member wants to change their vote. Appears to be a little indecision right now. Right now, 231 to 197. You see it right there. 221 Democrats, 10 Republicans, 10 more than voted for the impeachment. President Trump 1 year ago, have voted to impeach him a second time. As Congressman Hoyer was saying, it will be the Speaker's job then to sign the enrollment papers, to send it over to the Senate, and then they will start to negotiate the terms, whatever trial is going to happen in the Senate.
On this vote, the ayes are 232. The nays are 197. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
It has passed. The gavel has fallen. 232 yes votes for the impeachment of Donald John Trump. Just extraordinary. It has happened twice now to President Trump. Only president in American history to be impeached twice, just 7 days, less than 7 days now left in his term. We haven't heard much from the president today. We should be hearing from him at some point later today. He's under some pressure to say more, to speak out against the violence, to lower the possibilities that he faces, Lindsay Davis, an actual conviction in the Senate.
You know, and historically, it's interesting to note that between the first and second impeachments in our country's history, we're talking about a span of 130 years. And now between the third and the fourth, just 13 months. It's also interesting that going into today, you know, in the election, we heard so much from both sides talking about we're fighting for the soul of this country. And the election's over. The debate continues. We saw that fight again inside the Capitol today. Both sides were saying that we've got to put people before politics. Both sides were quoting Abraham Lincoln. They were fighting at the same point, but then arriving at a different conclusion. And one congressman summed it up by saying, are we going to condone through acquiescence or condemn through impeachment? In the end, they decided to condemn through impeachment.
The majority is there. Yvette Simpson, your thoughts on this historic day?
You know, I wish it was unanimous. I cannot believe that there are that many House Republicans who are not going to vote for impeachment. And it worries me that Mitch McConnell is also considering not taking this up. I mean, we again saw the expediency with which 8 days he appointed a woman to the Supreme Court for a permanent position, but they cannot, with all of the evidence, and you've talked about it, George, with all the evidence still not moving forward. You know, one thing that came to my mind was Donald Trump could be holding the gun and standing over the body, and they would still exonerate him. It is his invincibility that makes him dangerous and powerful. And so I don't care if you do it on the final day. It needs to be done, one, to send the message that he cannot get away with this, that no one can get away with this, that we're not tolerating it. I also was struck, George, just very quickly about the fact that these folks just took an oath to uphold the Constitution last week. And today, 195 of them have decided that they're gonna not keep that oath. As a lawyer, as a former public officer, you know, official, I know that oath is important. And to watch our leaders, after taking that oath, not do the thing that they know that the oath requires is really shameful.
Thank you,
It's
Yvette.
a sad day.
Thank you, Yvette. Mary Bruce, let's talk about what happens next. As I said, we have not heard from the Speaker about when she intends to send these articles of impeachment over to the Senate. We don't know much about how a trial is going to take place, but I know it's something they've been discussing up there on Capitol Hill, you know, pretty much around the clock.
Yeah, what comes next is now the first topic of conversation here. What we do know is that a Senate trial would likely and is likely to dominate the early days of the new presidency. That presents a challenge for Democrats and especially for Joe Biden, who wants to try and unite and heal the nation, but of course wants to hold President Trump accountable at the same time. It certainly seems, given what we've heard from Mitch McConnell and his staff, that this is not going to happen until the new president has been inaugurated, and that then presents such a host of challenges. You know, they're going to have to agree on a rules package. They're going to have to agree on how they do this. We know that Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell have been in discussion talking about this idea that Joe Biden has floated, that maybe they could possibly split their time so that Joe Biden is able to get to work on his agenda at the same time that a Senate trial can be held. There's a lot of unknowns here, and I think when you take a step back, you know, today is only the fourth time that we've ever had an impeachment in our nation's history, twice now for President Trump, and this is the most bipartisan impeachment of them all. But yet it exposes how divided this country is right now. And while those who support this impeachment will argue, yes, this is an important step to accountability, regardless of politics. You know, this is a difficult day for democracy. No American, I think, wants to see a president impeached. And it does just go to show, I think, the challenges ahead as the new administration and both parties are going to have to find a way to work together to try and heal the country and get some important work done.
One of the big X factors, thank you, Mary, is what the president's going to do, how he's going to handle it. John Carl, I know the president has been meeting with an increasingly smaller circle inside the White House about his options, which are all pretty bleak at this point. But what's the latest thinking on the president's approach to the next 7 days and how he might handle a trial?
Well, as you know, George, the two lawyers that led his impeachment defense last time have said no to this one. Jay Sekulow has said no. Pat Cipollone, who still is the White House counsel, but I am told barely on speaking terms with the president, has also made it clear he won't be leading that defense. So it looks like it would fall to Rudy Giuliani to lead the charge on this, and Alan Dershowitz, who you know, had a small kind of a cameo appearance in the first impeachment, and how he deals with his final week in office really is the big question. Is, does he go forward with more pardons? Of course, there's been a lot of discussion about a self-pardon. It's something the president has said publicly that he believes he is absolutely in his right to do. Of course, many others disagree with whether or not that would be legal. He's also been warned it would complicate his own legal background, his legal future. He could face increasing civil liability if he pardons himself, seen as an admission of guilt. And then the question is, does he pardon all those aides, all those people that were caught up in the Russia investigation that he hasn't pardoned yet? Does he pardon Steve Bannon? Does he do preemptive pardons for members of his family? These are the questions. What you don't hear him talking about very much is the big story in the country. Besides this, it's the pandemic, which seems to be. I don't get a sense in any of my conversations with White House officials that is something that is occupying any time at all of any of the president's time at all.
Thank you, John. Cecilia Vega, let me bring you in to get more on this. I was just thinking of that speech the president gave. I think it was at the Republican convention where he had that famous phrase, "I alone can fix it." That is more true than ever before for the president right now, as his top aides resign, as his cabinet officials resign, as he's basically very close to alone inside the Oval Office. The halls of the White House very empty.
The halls of the White House have been empty, George. Our team that's been there all day has been monitoring the Marine who stands guard outside the Oval Office, which usually is an indication of whether the president is in the Oval Office or not. And the Marine has been around intermittently, meaning the president came down to the Oval Office very late in the day, afternoon, and then the Marine has been gone and back again and gone and back again. We do know that he's been, the president has been watching these proceedings on television over the course of the day. You know, we got that statement from him, again, issued through the White House. We are hearing that he could be planning to release some kind of video this evening, something taped internally there at the White House. So we'll definitely await that. But you said it. I mean, we can't emphasize enough how alone Donald Trump is right now. And I just keep thinking back to the impeachment last year when the White House had a rapid-fire response team to combat every Democrat statement that was read into the House record, into the chamber record. That is not happening right now. His campaign, there is still a very small, minuscule team left, but releasing very few statements over the course of the day, essentially just retweeting what Republicans there have said. This, as the president is in the political fight for his life, the final few days of potentially his last run in politics, and his legacy is on the line, and he is there alone with aides who have quit, with cabinet members who have quit. People on January 6th were trying to get a hold of him, and he wasn't taking their phone calls. And here he is making these decisions alone with very little team around him.
Cecilia, thank you. We're joined now on the phone by Congressman Jason Crowe of Colorado, Democrat of Colorado. Congressman, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I actually quoted you to one of your fellow members of Congress, Adam Kinzinger, a while back, saying something, repeating that you had said about Republicans voting no out of fear. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there's different categories of, you know, you have those who are so morally bankrupt that have gone down the rabbit hole of Donald Trump that they continue to incite violence and supported the insurrection. But you have a much larger group of folks that are afraid. They're afraid of, the violence of the Trump base. And I've had a number of conversations along those lines. And my point to them has been, we've been warning you about this. We've been ringing the alarm bells for many years that this is the direction we're going down and seeing which way this would end. But now is the time to stand up and to exercise courage and do what's right for the good of the country.
Talk about, Congressman, I mean, you guys had this vote today. It's just 1 week after those extraordinary events. You were in the middle of the floor. We see you on the floor of the House right there as the protesters, the rioters, were breaching the barricades, heading towards the floor itself. What does it feel like to be a member of Congress right now?
I'm still processing that, George. It kind of comes and goes, thinking about what happened a week ago. I mean, they were trying to kill us, very obviously, trying to take our lives. And I actually gave my speech this afternoon at exactly the same time that a week ago today. I was staying in the gallery, holding the doors back and helping to defend the House chamber and the lives of my colleagues. Never in a million years would I think that I would have been in that position. So giving that speech, I think, was the important thing to do. This is the first step today, the impeachment in the House of Donald Trump, the first step to truth, to accountability, but also healing for our nation. And there are many steps ahead, and there's a lot of hard work, because we saw the birth of a domestic terror movement last week that will continue. We have our work cut out for us in the months and years ahead.
What are the biggest things you all have to do? I mean, you're still going to be investigating what happened last week. Several of your colleagues have talked about their belief that these protesters these rioters had a much larger network of support, including even, perhaps, they suggest, from members of Congress.
Yeah, we're still looking at that. I mean, we've launched investigations. I actually requested a General Accountability Office investigation, IG investigation over the weekend. They have since launched that investigation, so we're working with IG's office to scope it and to continue. There's going to be many other investigations that are going to have to happen, so we're going to collect all the facts. But we have an immediate near-term concern, and that is there are 3 very substantial terrorist plots against the inauguration, against members of Congress, against Capitol Hill. So we're working closely with law enforcement and the military. I've had a discussion with Secretary of the Army McCarthy to request that certain immediate measures are taken to ensure the integrity of the force and to bolster that force. We are on the path to making that happen, but we have some immediate issues that need to be addressed. And then we have to make sure that we're getting President-elect Biden the team that he needs to address this crisis and both the domestic and foreign threats. And then we will figure out where we go from there.
Okay, Congressman Crowe, thanks very much for joining us today. I want to bring in Chris Christie now, our contributor, former Republican governor of New Jersey, former prosecutor, has been an ally of President Trump for many years, but also told us on Sunday he believes the president committed an impeachable offense. What do you make of the fact that 10 Republicans voted for impeachment there in the House? We still don't know what's going to happen in the Senate, more or less than you expected.
Well, more than I expected, George. And I think it shows with how disciplined. You remember the last impeachment discussion and vote, no Republicans voted for it. And I think it shows you how far the president's conduct of the past 9 weeks have pushed some Republicans. And I think a lot more, probably wanted to vote that way, but made a political judgment not to. And whether that political judgment for them was right or wrong will be one that only history will determine. But I don't think there's a lot of, you didn't see any real substantive, very little substantive defense of the president's conduct over the last 9 weeks on the floor today. Much different than what you saw in the Ukrainian situation, where you saw a lot of substantive defense of his conduct. This time you did not. Most of the defense, as I was watching it on and off throughout the day, was process-related defense, not a substantive defense of the president's conduct over the last 9 weeks, where all of us are still waiting for the evidence of fraud that the president has promised to produce to back up his claims. And now, 7 days away from him leaving office, we still have no solid evidence of that fraud that he's alleged.
Chris, how much tougher is it going to be for the president of the Senate this time?
I think it will be tougher. I don't know whether there would be 17 Republican senators who would vote to convict. And again, you're going to hear a process argument there, I think, George, because the president will be out of office at that point. And so is a conviction necessary, and is it the right thing to do? And is it constitutional? And you've heard scholars on both sides of that issue. But I think it will be tougher than the last time. I think there will probably be more Republican senators who will vote to convict than the last time, when only Mitt Romney, voted on one count, as I recall. And so I think it will be tougher. I don't know that they'll get to 17, assuming that every Democrat votes to convict. So I think it will be harder, though.
Chris, thanks very much. Look at that scene on Capitol Hill right now. Put that picture back up right now. You just saw those National Guard troops. You see the new barricades, the new fences being put up around the Capitol right now. We just heard Congressman Jason Crowe say that there are at least, members of Congress have been briefed on the security situation, say that there are at least 3 significant terror threats against the inauguration next week. Want to get more on that from our Chief Justice Correspondent, Pierre Thomas. Pierre, everyone on the highest of alert right now.
George, this is extraordinary. I've not seen it this tense since 9/11. We got word of several bulletins today about the fear that armed Trump supporters, including radical right members, are planning to do more acts of violence. In fact, one of the briefings talked about the fact that 2 people who were in Washington, a part of that mob last week, are contemplating coming back to Washington. That's how serious it is, George. And also that there are concerns about all the state capitals around the country, all 50 states, and that law enforcement officials fear that they are so-called soft targets because they don't have nearly the security that you're seeing brought forth here in Washington. George, right now, law enforcement officials say the likelihood has increased since the impeachment proceedings started because people are so angry and they have so many guns out there available to them, George.
And Pierre, we know they had warnings. The FBI had warnings before the demonstrations last week, before the riots last week, but they weren't acted on in the proper way.
They were not. For some reason, and a lot of my sources are just asking the question, why wasn't there more support for the Capitol Police around the perimeter? If you have a situation where you know people are angry and animated, but George, in hindsight, I can tell you, there was just a belief that these people would not resort to what actually happened. Now, why that's the case, why they were more concerned about Black Lives Matter, that's a question that many people are debating going forward, George, but that is where we're left. Right now, they now know, based on what they saw last week, that there are thousands of people who potentially are willing to commit acts of violence, and they know they better be prepared.
Pierre Thomas, thanks very much. Chief Global Affairs anchor Martha Raddatz. Martha, the military made it very clear running up to the election, every day since the election, they wanted to stay out of the election. They didn't see that as their job in any way. Now they have no choice.
They have absolutely no choice. And as you said, George, that image is quite extraordinary. You have inside the President of the United States getting impeached for the 2nd time, and outside his legacy as well. The Capitol surrounded by National Guard carrying M4 rifles. And there will be 20,000 National Guard in this city by this weekend because of what they are expecting. The military did not want to get involved, but they would have been there, the National Guard, last week at this very time, had they been requested. Going forward, there are concerns. 20,000 National Guard plus law enforcement. These are citizen soldiers. They come from homes all over the region, and they've been called up. We've seen pictures of them taking a break inside the Capitol today, trying to grab some sleep anytime they can. But the Army and the Joint Chiefs of Staff have also reinforced the idea these troops must remain apolitical. Surely there are a lot of Trump supporters among the National Guard, among the military. They have reminded all of them they took an oath to the Constitution. We all saw former military members arrested over the past week who took part in the siege of the Capitol, which is extraordinary in itself after taking that oath to the Constitution. But as Pierre said, there are very, very real threats out there. There are threats to members. And I'm telling you, George, the supporters I met last week, the Trump supporters, whether they were violent or not violent, still believe that Donald Trump won that election. Nothing, they say, will change their minds. And they were parroting Donald Trump's speech even before the siege on the Capitol, even before his speech. They were saying exactly what he had been saying to them. And I think if there's some sort of message tonight, they will probably say the same thing, and they will probably say the same thing those Republican members said today who did not support impeachment. They will say it's political, and the people I've talked to say exactly that.
Martha Raddatz, thank you. Kenneth Moton, you were on the streets of Washington during the riots last week. You're there today. Talk about then and now.
A stark difference, George. A remarkable scene right here. You heard the numbers from Martha. Right now, 6,600 National Guard troops are on the scene right here on the east side of the plaza, the east side of the Capitol. This is where they've been staging layers and layers of security. We've got this 8-foot tall fence behind me that is really all the way around the Capitol, George. We talked about when it comes to these National Guard troops, some are armed, some are not. Those who are armed, George, they've been given those rules of engagement, and they've been told to protect this Capitol, George.
And that is what they were doing. It's nice to at least see a beautiful sunset behind the Capitol right now. Rachel Scott, also up on Capitol Hill right now. You were in the middle of the demonstrations last week. You've been in the halls of Congress this week. We've heard so much about the fear inside the halls of Congress right now. Members of Congress have to go through metal detectors right now. They are fighting over masks, all in the middle of this impeachment debate.
And it is an eerie feeling here, George, after what happened just 7 days ago. I can tell you after walking into that perimeter right around that fence that wraps around the entire U.S. Capitol grounds, I just started counting how many National Guardsmen I saw that were armed, and I counted at least 10 until the entrance right here. Walking through the halls of Congress and seeing National Guardsmen taking a break, resting after their rounds and after their shifts, trying to get a little bit of sleep in. And those are normally the areas where you see school kids come on tours here in Congress. And then you have all of the stories from lawmakers. You know, Susan Collins saying that she initially thought that it was an attack from Iran, that it was Iranians making good on their threat to attack the U.S. Capitol, but it was actually Americans. You heard Congressman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying how traumatic it was to be running down a hallway not knowing whether or not Capitol Police would be there at the end of it. You have to think that that is going to be on the minds of lawmakers, especially in the Senate, as they decide whether or not to convict President Trump, George.
Rachel Scott, thanks very much. I want to bring in Rahm Emanuel for a final word. Rahm, we haven't talked much about Joe Biden, but in 1 week from right now, he is going to be president of the United States, facing an array of challenges unlike any president has ever faced before. Economic recession, pandemic, coming off this impeachment, deep divisions in the country. We just heard 3 terrorist threats to his inauguration.
Yeah, I mean, that's the understatement that you haven't said. We haven't seen anything. And there are moments at times that have one of these things. There's a book out called On the Verge, which is about Lincoln's 13 days and the threats under here. You have the economic area. You have 1918 that was under Wilson. He has moments in every other president or every other president that faced a crisis, but they've all come together in almost a perfect storm for him. I think his tone is going to be, in a weird way, most important because it shows the contrast. And his graciousness, his DNA of decency is actually going to be a very important calming medication for the country. And this is where, you know, Teddy Roosevelt's notion of a bully pulpit, of how the president speaks to the country, that's going to be important. Second, like a laser on the COVID and getting the vaccine into the country, distributed and actually administered, and then also then seeing both the relief economically and then the stimulus. And he has coming at him, he has to get the stimulus done, he has to get the impeachment done, the impeachment will happen, and then reconciliation. So it's a perfect storm that we have not seen for another president except for individual things like this in other presidents' history.
That is the job ahead for Joe Biden. For today, Donald John Trump impeached for a second time by the United States Congress. Coverage continues on ABC News Live. World News Tonight with David Muir coming up at 6:30.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Are you sure about that, Commissioner? No.
Yeah. Yeah, I can do it. All right.
My life coach is trying to